and exhibit as many artifacts, relics, markers, documents, missing clues, and whatever else I could find before they too disappeared into oblivion. In effect, it was my vision to create a place to which historians, researchers, and treasure hunters could come to get answers, and a place to which they would be invited and welcomed to bring answers. By collecting and organizing all the missing bits and pieces under one roof, we would be able to enhance the knowledge and history of our culture, and in addition, at the same time, we could bring the necessary people together so that they might be able to effect meaningful recoveries that make it worth their while to participate in our work. Although our primary goal is one of education, I also realize the need to reward those who have helped us and put their trust in us. For me, this museum is a labor of love. For you, I would like it to become a clearinghouse of artifacts and information. I would like this museum to be a place where you can come to get help when you need it, and a place to which you can bring what you have to share with others of like mind and kindred spirit. Working together to this purpose, all of us can create a golden circle of friends dedicated to unlocking the hidden wealth of history lying just beyond our reach. And now that you know a little bit about who we are, what we're doing, and how you can help, let's get back to some of the legends and lost treasures of the Knights of the Golden Circle. The question we hear most often asked is how to look for Knights of the Golden Circle stashes, and how do you know when you found one? This chiseled rock here in front of me is a perfect example to start with. This rock is not a Knights of the Golden Circle marker, but it's an interesting place to start, as I said. You notice this rock has been all hand carved and it's wedge shaped from top to bottom. This is actually the top of the rock. This is the bottom of the rock. And if I use this as an example, this was buried this way into the ground. So once this is buried, it makes it impossible to pull this rock out of the ground. And you're thinking that you're pulling on a much, much bigger rock than what you are. Now, we brought this back from Ohio, and in doing research to try and find out where this came from or who left it there, who put it there, we could find no other rocks around it with any type of markers on it, except similar type rocks that were in a straight line. As we researched in historical societies and archives, we came across some interesting information about George Washington and how he had his geographers set up the what they call a geographer's line in the Northwest Territory in Ohio, and that's what this rock is a marker from. On the front of it, there's a long line that represents this geographer's line. Now, in doing research on the Knights of the Golden Circle, you have to go through a process of deciding whether certain rock markers belong to that group or belong to some other group. And it's a fairly easy matter. In artworks, they refer to something called provenance. And that's searching back to the origin. For example, if someone has a painting that they believe is a Rembrandt painting, they have to go back and determine if the canvas is of a certain manufacturer and of a certain age, if the paints have certain chemicals and certain pigments in them, if the grounds of the canvas has certain material in it, and if the painting came from a certain region in Europe. And all of these things tell the origin of that painting and whether it's legitimate or not. In the same way, you have to know a little bit about the Knights of the Golden Circle, what the detectives would call a modus operandi, or MO as they refer to it. And the Knights of the Golden Circle, because they knew that they would have to have these stashes hidden for many years, maybe 10 years or 20 years before they would get back to their second Civil War, they would have to find something permanent with which to mark their hiding places, something that could not be taken away. So the first step in finding a stash location or verifying markers that you found is to look around and see if there are other markers. If there isn't, if there's one or two markers, it could be something else. If you find a whole series of markers, some on trees, some on stones, some in conjunction with natural landmarks, maybe the twin peaks of a distant mountain that seem to line up, you've got a good start there. The second thing would be if all of these markers are in an area where you've got a permanent fixture. Now, permanent fixture could be a state line or county line, or it could be some markings near a county seat or courthouse or an old cemetery, All of these are permanent fixtures that will not and cannot be changed with time. Railroads were considered permanent fixtures. Ferry boat crossings were permanent fixtures. And that's the second thing to look for, is the permanency of surrounding lines or invisible lines. If you had one rail company whose rail track ran up to a certain point, and then that company stopped and the next company took over, the two rail lines where they met would have an invisible line that crossed. And lines like this were used, or sometimes switching lines. But the investigator would go to this point, which can be found through surveying, and walk into the woods either way and look for additional markers. And this junction of the two rail lines would always be a permanent marker that would stand forever, or so they thought back then. The third thing on the Knights of the Golden Circle is that they preferred to use caves, natural caves if at all possible, because this made it much easier for them to hide their supplies. And sometimes we talk about treasure sites, but these could be armaments, weapons of various sort, supplies, food stores, and money. And any of these things could be at one of their stash locations. But they preferred to use caves because they could put their supplies in that cave, create a secondary entrance to the back of the cave, and then cause the front to be blown shut or cause a natural landslide to shut that off. So if you go to an atlas, like a topographic atlas, and look at the United States, and look at those states that have the most caves, you'll also find that those are the same states that have the most treasure legends that are connected with them. For example, you'll find a great deal of the caves in Kentucky, Tennessee, parts of Virginia, Carolinas, Arkansas, Missouri, even parts of Louisiana and Texas. And the more caves there were in an area, the more treasure legends that you'll hear about from some of the locals in these towns. Now, if all these elements are there, if you have a cluster of markers and they seem to be clustered around some permanent fixture of some type, and particularly if it's an area where there are caves, you have a high probability that what you found does indeed belong to the Knights of the Golden Circle. Now let me turn this stone around so you can see the end of it here. And this is what I was talking about, that you can see the cut mark, a single line that goes over the top of it. And that was the indicator of the geographic line. And then there was a meridian line that crossed it. And there are a whole row of these markers that extend for miles in either direction on that geographer's line. This rock is not part of the Knights of the Golden Circle, as I mentioned. But when we go through the process of provenance, this rock will become a priceless treasure in its own right. I want to talk about symbols that are used by the Knights of the Golden Circle. But before I talk about symbols, it's important to mention that there are three Knights of the Golden Circles that you're dealing with. There are three separate organizations that were interconnected. The first Knights of the Golden Circle began in its formation in about 1820, and it formally began as the Knights of the Golden Circle organizations around 1832, probably in Zanesville, Ohio. And that was the first group. With this group came financiers from Europe, northern manufacturers, and plantation owners and money interests in the South. When the Civil War was fought and lost by the South, that was the end of that Knights of the Golden Circle. And when that came to an end, another group began to form shortly after the Civil War. It was this group, this second Knights of the Golden Circle, that brought people like Jesse James, Cole Younger, the Dalton family, and many others of what you believe are famous outlaws or infamous outlaws. It was the second group that then fostered a second Golden Circle idea. And this group continued until about 1929, and a little bit later. There weren't too many people left as time went on, and there weren't too many people that had the stomach for another civil war. Gradually, the second group had died out. There was a third resurrection of the Knights of the Golden Circle, probably in the 1950s, and It was this group that were the descendants, the members of the families, the grandsons. It was this group that then began to resurrect what was left, mostly to go after the treasures, some of them to go after the understanding of what had happened and what their families were involved